Hello, everyone. Um,
Hello.
this is we're gonna well, welcome to Agent Talk with Dogwan and Seth. I don't even have my script in front of me, but basically, you've been around a bit. You know that we're two agents talking about the industry and with an effort to try and make things a little easier to enter for those who aren't stuck within the confines of being wealthy and living in New York in someone's apartment. As always, this is free, but we would love you to donate to People in Coloring and Publishing, which Dongwon's going to put a link up. I'm a little frazzled, and we're going to dive right into working into the show. Like, how's the week going? I'll just say right now that childcare today is a little bit off, and my kid didn't sleep very well and is in a good place, and he's in the other room trying to go to bed, and he might not be able to do it. So I might have to duck out of here pretty soon to go try and rock him down for another 10 minutes. So we have to set things up so that Dongwon can just ramble, which is going to be great.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
Apologize.
Luckily, I'm good at just talking too much.
Well, you're here with us. It can be a conversation.
For me, this whole period's been working from home, socially distancing, quarantining, whatever we're calling it. But, I mostly work from home. I don't have kids. It's just me. It's a lot easier to manage. How's that been for you throughout this entire process? And now looking at the kids going back to school, what's that like?
Yeah, well, my older kids was in pre-K. So at a school that just closed. So we just sort of
totally gone, or
it was just closed. Not totally gone. It just closed, but it last, in the spring, there wasn't distance learning. It was just done. And so the first 2 weeks was really hard, but then, we have a nanny and the nanny folded into the nanny and then this job, but she wasn't really prepped for it. We basically had to switch nannies. It was this whole thing, but we have this small pod of kids that we hang out with, and you can put them in this. Basically, we found childcare in some ways, this little camp with the same small pod of kids, which is good, because then we could connect with them. So things up to normal, but starting next week is distance learning for that kid in kindergarten. So he's going to be back home, fully integrated, which I'm sure you've all had to deal with, and or lots of you've had to deal with, and it's going to be fine. It just means that even this show, we might have to switch the times or something like that. Because my wife said she's a psychologist, so her job is very important. Well, mine is theoretically important. So I'm sorry I'm rambling, but I figured I should talk while I'm here. Basically the challenge is tends to be around I've been able to let go some of it though. I've been starting at 9 o'clock. Pacific time, so that's 12 in New York. That's awful. I'm way behind every time I start every day, but I've been starting to just let that go, and people have been starting to understand that, or they've all understood it. So I am very curious to know what's going to happen this fall. But I do think everyone until January, in their mind, I don't know why we think January is going to magically there's going to be a vaccine that everyone gets on Christmas Day, but I think that everyone's sort of giving themselves until January to have a break, but I don't know how it's going to go. And so my son's going to be home.
Honestly, I think that's just as far out as we can think at this point, right?
And the stuff they don't tell you though, right? Or you don't, everyone's talking about distance learning or whatever, it's not, school is one thing where you sit in front of the computer and kids have a hard time doing that, but then they're done. And they can't go into any programs because programs don't exist. So it's then it's what do you do with them? But they already spend all this time on screen and all this whatever. So it's really just trying to figure out the whole jazz. And my kid is standing up in his crib. I'm not going to show you all because I don't know what you can find from my phone right now. But he jumped. He just jumped. Great. So
Great.
That's
very
awesome.
Sleepy. That is the most sleepy activity. Bounce houses are known for their soporific qualities.
Let's see. Oh, he's making very little noise. Oh, no, he's talking. Okay, all right. So
yeah.
I'll give it a few more minutes before I go in
there. All right. Well, when you got to duck out, you got to duck out. I will try and figure out how to talk about this. So this week, we're talking about marketing and publicity from the agent's perspective. This is, I think, for me at least, probably one of the most challenging areas that we operate in, and one of the more challenging topics for us to engage with. I have some views on why, but how do you what's your general thought and approach to this? Like, how do you view this part of the publishing process from an agent's perspective? How do you see your role here?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I like to think that, an editor or a publisher is there and going to be covering these things, but I like to act like they won't. I'm getting my split screen up. Sorry, I was a little behind today. I try to act like they won't. So my real overall theory is to be a value add, and I think that you'll see a lot of like older publishers think of agents as like scum and parasites and whatever, but I like to think of, they won't even let them be in touch with the publicists and stuff, which is insane. When I don't want to be like the annoying person just defending my author's interest, but rather be the annoying person who's helpful, who has my own contacts, who has my own whatever. So I just take it upon myself basically to be a publicist and to be a marketing person. Now the problem with marketing is that you need money. And that's like relying on the publisher side of things. But for publicists, I like to be in the know. I like to have my own connections. I like to be really right there and trying to be there, every step of the way to help. And that's so basically the short-term idea. Again, I'm giving like broad strokes here, which we probably would have covered all the way through. But again, the idea for me is that I'm assuming the publisher is gonna fail us, and that's might be the worst way to go in some ways, but when it comes to publicity and marketing, you get the sense from pretty far out whether things are working in the publisher's realm, and I just want to be a tool, and I want to think if the publisher fails, then I can still do something, and that's sort of myself to help. So that's my overall theory on this. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, kind of similar. I don't think I approach it as much from this perspective of the publisher is going to fail.
They're going to fail.
I think
that's you being a publisher talking, a former. That's you from the
totally. No, that is kind of my bias, and there is a little bit. One of the things that I have a bias as an agent because of my experience on the other side, and because I have so many close friendships still there, that I tend to be a little bit more forgiving of publishers than a lot of my peers. And I don't know if that's better or if that's worse. There are times where it catches me where I'm like, I should have been a little bit more skeptical here going in and a little bit less trusting. And there are other times where I think it allows me to cooperate or collaborate with them to come up with a better outcome because I do understand what they're going through a little bit better. But, there's all those trade-offs, right? That this is all comes back to what we were saying about finding the right agent for you. So I try not to go in being super combative at the same time that most marketing of publicity and publishing is disappointing.
Well,
right?
wait, to be clear, I don't go in combative. I go in expecting them to fail.
Totally. Which there is an important difference there. There's a very important difference. Yeah. So it's a slightly different perspective at the same time that I have plenty of reason to expect failure, right? And, apologies to any of our publishing, editorial, and marketing friends who are watching this. It isn't that we don't appreciate and respect everything that happens. It's just, it's hard. Yeah. It's so fucking hard.
Well, give everyone context, books that are succeeding at a high level still often don't sell copies, and so you can have a a publicity marketing thing that's firing all cylinders, and the book still doesn't quote unquote work. So please understand again, and I think what Don was saying is absolutely right. It's the same way I treat Hollywood in film and TV is my expectation is that a movie's not going to get made because probably a movie's not going to get made. So we want to do the things that can lead to that the best, or sometimes the complete opposite pivot is what do you do that will just get your author the most money at this moment because the movie's not going to get made. And so part of it is just trying to come in with this mindset in my mind that allows me that motivates me to get my own context, that motivates me to be proactive, that motivates me to be a value add, as opposed to sit back and assume it's going to work. So that's the attitude that I have there.
Right. Yeah, totally. And I think that's a really good way to approach it. And I want to dive into more what that means in a second, but let's back up first and talk about we've mentioned these things quite a bit at this point, but what is marketing and what is publicity? What's the difference between them? and what's their role in the overall publishing process. And if you got to go, I can talk about this first.
You know what? I think that this is perfect time for you to try, because you were in the house,
cool.
So you actually know the literal definition, where I'll be just like, and you can hear my kids. So give me, guys, I'll be back in like 7 minutes.
All right.
Probably within 9.
I'm gonna try and cover as much as I can. We may jump to a few questions before Seth is back. So if you guys have initial questions, start dropping them in the chat. I'm gonna explain a little bit my perspective on marketing and publicity, and then we'll answer some questions. Then we'll come back to sort of the main topic once Seth is back. I think that's how we're gonna do it. So, okay, in terms of marketing and publicity, the way that I see it is really the difference is, marketing is more about the strategy. It's more about the overall positioning of the book. It is also about paid efforts, right? The main difference between marketing and publicity is whether or not you're paying for it. So paid efforts generally are marketing. Organic efforts are generally publicity, right? So publicity is trying to get word of mouth going, getting author blurbs, getting reviews out, award nominations, all those kind of things fall under publicity in terms of trying to build awareness for the book through media outlets, through social media, all of those things that are using the publisher's channels, developing the publisher's channels, and then using third parties. So those are all the big ARC mailings. Those are, trying to get reviews. Those are setting up bookstore events, right? So tours. Even though tours are paid things, those fall under publicity in terms of trying to schedule events, trying to get them to give talks at conferences, at bookstores, and all those things, right? So paid speaking gigs are slightly different. That generally comes under a speaker's agency, but there's a lot of overlap with publicity there as well. So marketing is almost always about paid efforts, right? So marketing is advertisements. Hold on, I'm going to mute Seth. Yeah, okay. Marketing is about, there we go. I just took Seth off the stream for a second. When he's back, I'll add him back. For the moment, you get to get me in widescreen. All right, anyways, so marketing is, again, strategic, right? So how are we positioning the book? How are we thinking about the book from a high level? How are we framing how we're talking about it? And then advertising, right? So any paid campaigns that are happening, Facebook ads, website, online marketing, any print media that's happening is pretty rare these days. Oftentimes a big book, transit ads. Anytime you're in the subway and you see an ad for a book, or a bus stop and you see an ad for a book, that's all really the sort of marketing and ad promo departments. Marketing tends to be the umbrella term for all of this activity. It's quite important on both sides of it, but so that's the general breakdown of the difference between the two. There's some stuff implied in what I was saying in terms of which one's more important than the other. I think publicity tends to be more activity. Marketing tends to be a little bit more of the strategy. But it's a real balancing act between the two sides of that. And the goal of all of that is to make as many readers as possible, and especially the specific readers that you think will be engaged with your book, aware of it and in a position where they can buy it, right? So I think, honestly, when I talk about publishing, a thing that I like to say a lot is that there's only one true question of publishing, and everything descends from that. And that is, who is this book for, right? So marketing is really where the rubber meets the road on that, in terms of, okay, we've identified who this is for, we've edited it, we got the cover, we got the positioning, all these things are in place. How do we actually access that audience? Which honestly, I think is maybe one of the most, if not the hardest task in this entire business. So that is why Seth and I are talking about it in what can be seen a little bit as a negative light, because it's a major point of friction for us in terms of figuring out how do we actually get it to that audience. And that's where the authors are also feeling the most friction and the most pressure of, okay, I did the heavy lift, I wrote this thing, we did the book deal. Now, what is the publisher doing to help me sell those books? And that's a real uphill climb sometimes. Seth, are you back, or?
Hello, everyone. Yeah, can you hear me on a delay, or do you hear me live here?
You're slightly delayed for me, so. But anyways, we'll figure it out.
Yeah, I'm in my basement. I had to move one more time, but my kid is definitively not sleeping now. So he's over here, and I'm in a playroom. And if I had to go outside with him or whatever, we will. But I'm here. I don't mean to be more of a problem than not. So apologies if I am.
Not
So
at
how
all.
was the defining? Does everyone feel like you did a good job there? Anything I need to add?
Probably stuff you need to add. Let's see what chat says. If I did a good job explaining it. So Woo comes in with a question. I'm going to hit this real quick before we move on. That I mentioned that before you already know long before the book comes out that it's going bad. There's specific signs that tells you things are going awry. Early on, usually you get a marketing plan and a publicity plan from the publisher, right? So sometimes you get that plan and because you've seen this a million times, there's 15 items on it. So the author thinks it's great, but that 14 of those 15 items are bullshit, right? Or other things that are really baseline stuff that they do, right? So when you look at that plan initially, you can look at it and be like, oh, we got no budget. We got no innovative plan. There's no sense of what we're doing around this. So that's your first sign that like something's not quite clicking. And then honestly, for me, a lot of times it's just vibe, right? It's what's the energy? What emails are we getting? What excitement is there? What plans are in place? How's the author feeling? How is the author connecting with the team? All of those things, you start to get a sense of that pretty early on. And that is the early indicator for me. That's sort of the canary in the coal mine that maybe things aren't going as well as one would hope.
Yeah, and you can figure out, I mean, like to get even more specific, what Don Juan said is exactly right, and his marketing and publicity plan. And I don't know what an editor, I'm curious to know your position as an editor here, because surely you've had to give some of these from time to time. Like, know that we know that that's not good. Do you feel like it's worth your while just being a little bit more honest with like the agent or whatnot? I'm curious. And before you actually answer that question, because I'm very curious, but as an example of the things that you see on there is when it's like 14 different Penguin Random House verticals. It's like, we're going to put it on our social media, which has 6 million followers. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Well, everyone should be getting that anyways all the time. Like, that's absurd.
Oh, they're like, we're putting it on our YA website. And you're like, 5 people look at that thing. Nobody looks at the thing. I don't even know what that thing is.
Exactly. Or even if it is one of the bigger ones, I mean, it's still like, again, that's like a normal servicing job, right? What is innovation, right? What do those things mean? And so I always make sure that when we come to those meetings, not always, but I try to make sure when we come to those meetings to come with ideas, which means collaborating with your agency to talk about what those could be based off of a certain type of book, and also use your own, experience that is built into that space. And then you speak to the author about what the author can bring out, what the author has seen that's been done that's awesome. And you bring those things in. But the sad truth is sometimes you look at that that list and you say, okay, what am I doing here? Am I just giving you ideas on a shoestring budget, or am I there's stairs there is or do we have like the space to come up with real cool ideas that people are going to run with? So I don't know.
So I think a lot of that I'm about to answer your question. I haven't forgotten it. I think there would be times if I had a particular connection to an agent and there was someone, we were just on the same page, we got each other, I trusted them to not use that against me later. Because the risk is if you're an editor and you say that thing and that agent goes and complains to your boss, then you've made the whole company look bad, right? And you can really get burned for doing that. So it has to be a very specific relationship that you have with that editor. And, there are a few editors that now as an agent I have that relationship with, and they'll come in and be like, yo, here's the situation, here's what's going on. We can't do this thing, right, that you're asking for. And sometimes my job is to ask anyways. Sometimes my job is like, listen, I know you don't have budget for it, but I'm still going to ask for this thing because that's what we need to make this book work. And I want you to figure out how to make it work, even though right now you don't think you have budget. Sometimes it's making the ask that is an impossible ask. That said, it's always worth pushing for it. But as an editor, yes, every now and again I would have the conversation of like, listen, numbers on book 1 were this. We don't have budget for, a big paid campaign. We're not doing Facebook ads for this. So you know what? We all got to hustle to get those organic hits, right? We got to hustle to get people talking about it on social media. Your author's got to get out there networking. We got to try and write some blog posts, things like that. So, it's tough. It's a tough conversation, but I think it behooves everyone to be realistic about what efforts are going to be possible and what's going to be put in play for a given book at a given point in the cycle. not a fun conversation on either end of it, you know?
Well, I didn't really realize how many, like, what the great advantages about you being the previous editor is for this specific conversation, but there's so much there. I mean, it's like, so like, can you be a little bit more specific? Like, what, at a ballpark range, like, what's a bad, normal, and good amount of budgeting? I mean, obviously Orbit is...
Oh, no idea. You'd have to talk to the marketing director.
Oh, really? So they don't tell you numbers?
Even as an editor, I wouldn't know what the budgets were. They wouldn't tell us, because then we go complain to our bosses about it. So, I mean, I think that it wasn't they were deliberately hiding it from us. It just wasn't going to be a productive conversation, because as an editor, you're also on the author's side. Like, at the end of the day, you're on the company's side, but we're the advocate for the author in-house, right? So, you and I as agents sometimes think about editors as being oppositional to us, but in fact, they're our main ally in the whole process, right?
Well, that's how you have a bad relationship, is if you, like, there's a couple times that there's a great editor who we basically call, a yes man or yes person, I guess. And it turns out that they just won't at all ruffle any feathers in the company. And so it's like, I no longer want to deal with that person, even if they can be like friendly and nice and great and a great advocate for themselves, not for the book.
So sometimes what I look for when I'm deciding, am I going to sub to an editor, is like, can you scrap? You know what I mean? And sometimes that means you're going to scrap with me, right? But I can take that, right? I need to know that you know how to fight for what you need for a book, right? Absolutely. And how to fight in a way that, like, allows for good outcomes, not just unreasonably burning everything down, right? That's also not an editor I want to work with, because their marketing director probably hates them because they are annoying, right?
Well, here's a good example of that too, and I agree completely. And a good example of that would be like when an editor soon after publication is like, people are really excited about this. I slip this to blank, who's the best publicist, who's our biggest publicist. And I think that we're going to get them on board to do it, because it's not always like that, right? Your biggest publicist is going to work on the biggest books, and maybe like needs to be convinced on that debut that comes in, whether that, and if you have an editor who's like doing that, that's like a genuine thing that an editor can do.
Totally. And the ones I love working the most are the ones who come to me early and they're like, hey, so I slipped this to so-and-so. They had this feedback. Can we tweak this thing? Can we change the title this way? I need a reading line from you, like a pitch line from you, to figure out, okay, how do we get people on board for this? That person who's going to collaborate with me, but how to build that in-house support is my favorite person to work with, right?
Right.
And sometimes it's not going to happen, right? Sometimes no matter what you do, marketing hates it, publicity hates it for some reason. They're just not excited about it. Your author pissed them off, like something happened. So, it just depends on what it is.
Well, you just brought up something that's interesting. I know, guys, I'm sorry, we're going all over the place, but that's my fault. But you just said author pissed them off. Can you just talk about that for a second? I mean, we can't just fly by that.
Totally. Sometimes the biggest problem you have with dealing with marketing and publicity is your own damn client. I love all my clients. They're all perfect angels. None of them have ever done this. Except for so-and-so and so-and-so. I mean, it's difficult, right? Because the publishing process is really hard and authors get discouraged. Or, authors, they're people who write books in dark rooms, right? They're not necessarily the masters of social grace, and they're not necessarily people who know how to write professional emails, right? Which is fine, because that's not the skill that they were trained in. But this is why, switching to the author hat for a second, or, talking to authors a second, I talk about there's a difference between being a writer and being a professional author. And really, if you want to be a published, successful author, you have two jobs. One is write good books. The other is be a professional author. And that includes collaboration, project management, writing good emails, learning how to, get along with other people. And, the thing that I advise authors pretty much especially starting out, is say yes to everything and do it with a smile. You know what I mean? Just be hype about anything they ask you to do, up to a point, right? Don't let yourself get taken advantage of. And that's sort of where I come in to watch it and be like, hey, you're asking too much here. This should be a paid gig, or this is unreasonable, or whatever it is. But especially when you're starting out, being game is so important, and being fun to work with is so important, right? Because at the end of the day, everyone on the publisher side is overworked and underpaid, right? So you got to give them a reason to want to work with you specifically, other than it is their responsibility to do so. it would be a beautiful world if everyone did the best job that was conceivable because it was their job to do so. That is not the world we live in, right? So
right, and remember, it's our job. You want that car? Okay, it's our job to be the bad guys, right? Come show me.
Yeah. Exactly.
So like, this comes up with, say, cover, for instance. Here's the easiest example. Like, it makes sense that you don't like your cover. Sometimes the art is bad. There's no way. Even the first round revision is like still for me like pretty intense. Like you just got to be careful with the way that you deal with it. So, I think that's what the biggest thing is. Like, if you have an issue, you smile, you talk to your agent. Your agent figures it out.
Yeah.
Your agent comes in as the thing. Your agent's like, no. Look, they're willing to do all this stuff and whatever, but I have an issue with that. That's like our job.
Exactly.
And you act as the buffer.
And so when I've seen that go wrong is when the agent isn't given the room to do that. And there's not enough of a definition between who's the one yelling right now. You know what I mean? So, I think sometimes that's on me, sometimes it's on the writer. But the thing that is the most dangerous thing that could happen in the process is your marketing publicity team hates your author, right? Like, there's oh man, I'm not going to name names, but there's a very, very big author out there who is notorious for just being impossible to work with. And that person's entire publicity team has refused to book any future events for them. And it's like, I can't overstate how big of a person that is in terms of the publishing. But at the end of the day, there's a question in the chat about how big an advance affects his marketing budget. An advance helps, but if you're an asshole, it ain't going to do shit for you. Like you got to get your team on board first. And us, a lot of time, our job is to be the grease in that wheel, right? To make sure that everyone's getting along, to make sure that those conversations are happening, that they're staying positive, they're staying productive, and aren't descending into bad feeling. But that's hard to do sometimes.
Yeah,
because we're not in it. You're trying to puppeteer a social situation, 3 steps removed. So
yeah, that's absolutely right. That's a good way of putting it. Like, there's only so much we can do. But it's interesting. It's like when you think about some of the things that can move a needle, right? There is, a publisher's enthusiasm, a publisher's decision to say, this is a book we're going to push at NPR harder than any of our other books. Mind you, we might not get NPR. But if we're a big 5 publisher and this is the one book we're really pushing, then we'll do our darn best, right? And you might not even get that chance in some ways. So when people talk, like, look, we'll be a little bit more honest about that book advance. Like, when you have a large book advance, it definitively affects your marketing budget, right? But what I want to say is, like, maybe they won't be working for you with smiles on their face. But of course, they're more like there's more need to make that book a success. And I do find the conversations about, like, not caring about advances to be a bit naive in terms of, like, the realities of, like, money and situations. Or as a writer, I remember at MFA program, we used to say things like, if I got $100,000 advance, I would keep 25, give 75 back, and say, use this to make my book big. And that sounds amazing. It's literally impractical. Like, keep the money yourself, hire an outside publicist, and we'll talk about that in a second. But I do call this process in-house pampering. Like, I really think it's important, and I think you have to be, like, you don't always. Sometimes it's me. Sometimes it's my author. Sometimes it's things like when you have that meeting. A lot of the meetings that you have, publicity, marketing, piecing meetings, sometimes they're in person. Obviously not anymore, but sometimes they're in person or whatever. You go and you bring something nice, or you send something nice to your team, or whatever. I know that seems crazy, but if you're willing to, like, create bookmarks to give to people, why wouldn't you be willing to, like, send something nice to your team that's doing something for you? And, like, once, like.
I cannot overstate how important the holiday presents are. At the holidays, send cards, send chocolates, send something to your team.
I know, it's crazy. It is crazy. By the way, random famous story from Sterling Lord. There was Chris's client, the leg.
No, it was George's client.
So
he was also the guy who sent us a whole bushel of bananas that one time.
This is amazing. Basically, he was like, if you sell this book, I'll give you my left leg or something. And then he sent us a chocolate leg, like a full-size chocolate leg. That was in our fridge people were eating it for months.
Oh yeah, I ate a lot of that leg. that foot stayed in the freezer for almost a year at some point, and every now and again you open the freezer and the foot would just fall out, and you'd be like, "What the fuck?" Like, yeah.
And then you'd be like, "Well, I guess I'll just eat it." But the point is,
I don't know if anyone ever ate the foot. That was just weird.
Well, the thing is that like, so here's an example of me doing something that has nothing to do. It's also our relationship, right? We're talking about agents here, so like. Occasionally, when there's an unexpected big hit that happens, like the publicist lands a New York Times book review that I didn't think would happen, or a good good NPR show or something that where we especially didn't think it would happen, I'll even send that person something myself from me, because I want to keep that relationship going for me too. I want to work with that person. I want to remain that value add, and I want to acknowledge
that person out for drinks, right? Exactly. Like get a lunch with the marketing people too. Don't just think about editors. Think about the whole team, right?
Yeah.
If you get access to the sales folks, like if you ever like get to meet some of them, take those people out for drinks too. I can't recommend that enough to build up that network and that connection.
Right.
Especially if you're doing a lot of work with a particular publisher, then building those connections there it's man, I can't overstate how important and how useful that is. Yeah.
Right, because we were talking about the granular, which is a singular book, and then also you can see that a lot of the things that you do here, like for an author, it's like you might get burned at that place, and then they'll just go to another place. Just go. That's not easy, but whatever. They'll go somewhere else. For us, like we still are going to work with that place forever.
Yeah. That's the thing. And you can use that leverage, right? I can be like, hey, I have a huge author with you. You need to do right by my other clients too. Otherwise, I don't know whether I'm going to keep working with you with my huge authors too. You know what I mean? Like that's
twice.
What we do is have that leverage, to make sure. And also, like, I know what you're capable of because I see what you're doing over here. Yeah. So the fact that you're doing this over here is complete BS. Like, I know what your capabilities are, and I know how good you can be when you're on it. So what's happening? You know what I mean? And so those are things that we can do to apply leverage. That said, at the end of the day, the reality situation is I find that we're pretty damn limited in what we can do here, right? Like it's a lot of stress and it's a lot of worry and it's a lot of work, but sometimes I feel like the impact of what we can do is a lot lower than I wish it would be. Maybe that's just because I'm used to, or not used to, but I had that experience of being in-house and being able to push some of those levers a little bit more directly. But
well, let's talk about what we can do. I mean, right? So
this is where I think you have more to say than me. I think you have much clearer ideas of what's doable than I do.
Well, first of all, I mean, things matter differently. Well, you can do different things in different like subgenres or whatever, right? And there's so many things, right? You can have connections with authors. You have your own clients who will write blurbs for you from time to time, will be on events for you from time to time, will be big mouths from you from time to time. But then you also have relationships with other people that are other authors who you also play the same game. So that's like one thing that we do probably on the front line as much as anyone else. We can get them blurbs. There's been times, one of those things I was annoyed about publicists not connecting is a publicist didn't connect to me about, I'll be straight up about this one. This is Tilly Walden on a Sunbeam about that book. And Tilly emailed me and was like, hey, do you have connections to to Ann Leckie, right? Because, we want to get the book to her. And I was like, why am I not on this call? And, it turns out they wanted Ann Leckie, they wanted Becky Chambers, and I came in and I got them both of those. I ended up signing Becky Chambers partially because of that initial connection, which is very nice. And then third of all, I was like, guys, you didn't talk to me, but I heard Tilly once say that Brian K. Vaughan came to her table and bought all her stuff. So why aren't we connecting to Brian K. Vaughan? And he blurbed it. And that's because that's like what you do is that you take in that information that your clients have and you present it, right? But the other things that you can do is really, it's it really is connections everywhere. Like what happens sometimes on some of your bigger books is that they have this publicity and marketing. Well, it's a publicity lunch or dinner. So sometimes it's with just your author. Sometimes it's with 3 or 4 of some imprints authors, and they invite all these different publicity people from BuzzFeed and the New York Times to booksellers are there a lot, and you go to those things and you schmooze just as much there and you have a good time. And I did that once just recently, this amazing book by Meredith Toulousan called Ferris, this amazing memoir. And I was there, I was in LA, and I met Sam Sanders of It's Been a Minute, and he's hosts his own NPR show. And then we went out for coffee and he tells me what he wants, and I'm not going to bother him. I'm only going to send him those things that he wants, but we've already gotten 2 bookings because of that. And that's me being there. That's us being there, not abusing, not whatever, but we make our own content. That's something a publicist would be doing too, right?
Yeah.
So you don't want to step on it, but you just are saying you work together when those situations. I have contacts at Amazon. I have had lunch with Penny from Penny's Picks at Costco. We can do all those things, and we should do all those things. Sometimes to pick the brain, sometimes to bother them and see, and pushing a client. And listen, I'm a writer too, so like sometimes I meet them in the context of me writing my own thing. But then after that, then what happens, right? So I think basically the point is that you network by meeting editors and stuff, but you also got to network to be a value add for your clients. And then the final things are just secured knowledge, right? So like when a book, this is what Don was referencing earlier, is that when a big book does well, you should remember everything that did well by it. And some of those strategies are about like that person's good book, big platform and money, but some of it is really just like, this is a creative idea. So like when one of my clients did a really successful Kickstarter and got like 7,000 pre-orders for that, I was the one who pushed that to happen twice at Penguin Random House for other ones. And we decided, we sold 9,000 pre-orders of a book for one of my authors, but then we but then it just became very clear that the Times just weighted those sales not towards the list, which is absurd because it does go to individual people, but whatever. So the point is
it's still great that you got those pre-orders though, right? Like at the end of the day, you still sold 9,000 copies.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm sorry, that was a lot of money, but I'm just
it's super helpful. And this is where being an agent is a delicate balance between pessimism and optimism, right? I think we are very aware of the fact that most books don't succeed, most strategies don't work, but we always need to believe that it's going to work in this case for this particular book, right? So I think a lot of it is for me trying to figure out how to balance my awareness that any individual thing is probably not going to get the traction we need or may not make the difference that we need it to. But in aggregate, if we do 15 things right, then hopefully that drives something forward, right? The problem is not knowing what is the strategy that works, what was the thing that made the difference. There's that old marketing saw about, we know 50% of what we do does nothing. We just don't know which 50%, right? That's the problem. And what works and what doesn't work is going to change from book to book to book. Each book is its own unique launch challenge, its own unique marketing challenge, right? So figuring out how to balance that is always the thing that I'm struggling with, in terms of where do we focus our efforts? What do we push for? What do we ask for? What do we do individually? And I think figuring out how to balance that is the thing that I'm still working at wrapping my head around. I can tell when something's going off the rails. I can tell when something's going well, but I don't know, man. Like it's how do you figure out what to do? What do you ask for? What do you push for? Because I'm not an expert, right? I know what I know, but I don't do this every day, right?
And remember the things that you can push for that you do get sometimes, like sometimes they do nothing. Sometimes they do nothing. And then sometimes there's other things. Like I've even been in situations where I've had some of my bigger clients literally give me, my biggest clients once gave me $25,000 to negotiate an ad buy with Amazon directly because they wanted to. Amazon had some interest. Oh, he's getting tired. Amazon had some interest in actually, bypassing the publisher and giving me a deal. I was interested. They were interested. Big bestseller. The book did really well, but I don't think that the buy did anything in my mind, and they think they did a lot. So it was like, and of course there are the numbers behind the things, but it's like, I thought they were just doing smoke and mirrors, and I'll never do that again. But I was really happy to do it because I wanted to see about it. And so that's why when you publishers are really like, we don't send you on tour because tour is a waste of money, but we will buy, advertising on Facebook. That to me now makes sense, but I still want them to spend as much as they would have spent on tour on Facebook if that's what they're going to do, Right.
It also depends a lot on the book. There's some books where like I would much rather the tour than the marketing spend. There's some books where I'm like, screw tours. This person is not the right person to send on a tour. What we need to do is blow it out and spend a lot of money on Amazon, spend a lot of money on Facebook, and get eyeballs on it. It really depends on the type of book that you're doing, and it depends on you understanding what that is and the publisher understanding what that is. And I think the most friction comes into play around that. Where I think the hardest parts about taking an indie author traditional is the fact that there is this big gulf between the marketing strategies between those two groups and what works, and the traditional publisher being unable to wrap their head around what the core strategies are for an indie author and what's worked for them in the past. But also for the indie author to not understand, here's how the traditional publishing system is set up, here's what they're good at, here's what they're wired to do. So, I think for us, a lot of that comes down to negotiating that difference and trying to grease that friction a little bit. But I don't know. What do you think works? Like top 5 strategies, top 3 strategies, anything out there that you think is working?
No, wait, let me ask you that question. Let me clarify. Are you saying what sells books, or are you saying what strategies as an agent to a publisher? What is the specific? Narrow that for me.
No. What sells books? What are you excited about when you see a publisher do it? Right?
If a publisher gets one of the book clubs, that's Book of the Month Club, Reese, Good Morning, Jenna, Bush, whatever. That's as big as it gets. Love a book club. I love a big co-op, which means like placement in a store or on Amazon or whatever that might be. Hello. I love a billion blurbs. I hate blurbs, but if they're like, we are going to get all of our people, all of our big people, to me, that's a sign that they're really going to push this to the high level, or that, if like the publisher, gets his personal person to blurb it, then, that's just a sign, not even if it doesn't necessarily, whatever. There's some other obvious ones. There's obviously big reviews at big places, but especially if you can be creative, like for my web comics, if you can get them to do a New York Times a video where you should have them doing stuff, like they'll do that stuff if you're creative enough about it, So basically, I want what sells books. I mean, it's really right now. It's really book clubs and store placement is what I would say. Yeah, the two things. And what else? What else sells books?
Yeah, I mean, nothing. Is the real answer.
Some awards do too, but like you have to have it, and you have to have an editor help you with that. But
I think some of the things are like, there's stuff that has a secondary effect and stuff that has a primary effect, right?
Yeah.
In terms of primary effect, reviews, book clubs, absolutely. The one that I think is the most important is the only thing that we know sells books for a fact. The only thing that always works is books in bookstores. If you don't have enough books in stores, you're not going to sell a lot of books, right? It's just the baseline. And it sounds really dumb when I say it that way, but like, so for me, so much of marketing is getting enough books in the marketplace, getting them in a store, especially front of store where people can see it. So sometimes buzz is essential for that, because buzz will get bookstores excited about putting it up front. So for me, so much of publicity, so much of marketing isn't even about accessing consumers. It's about accessing booksellers, right? Yeah. Getting booksellers excited about it, getting them to believe that consumers are excited about it. Because the reality is, you and I know this, that the conversation, the discourse around a book versus the actual readership is almost completely decoupled, right? Like the buzz around a book is so poor of an indicator of a book's success. There's so many books that we think of as being huge successes because they were so buzzed about, but you go look at the numbers and you're like, oh, this sold 3,000 copies, right? Total, right? So those are things to keep in mind, that like for me, the thing I'm always trying to figure out how to target is the bookseller rather than the consumer.
Well, to that end, sorry, go on.
Yeah, go for it. No.
Oh, I was just gonna say is that one thing that like, I do think that some of the industry oriented buzzy things, like if you get your book on a BEA buzz panel, again, that might not guarantee anything, but that means a big deal in our industry, which creates a level of buzz that's straight to the booksellers that will get those books. Another thing, like one thing that like Del Rey does really, really well is when they want a book, they print 1 billion galleys of a book, which means early copies. Think about Pierce Brown. Pierce Brown, I think of that first book, Red Rising, I think they've given
we talk
around
about this all the time.
30,000 copies away or something. But they've sold like 1 billion.
For 3 years, every goddamn con you went to, there was always a table just stacked to the brim with Red Rising, right? And, even 2 years, 3 years after that book was out, I would still go to cons and I'd be like, oh, there's the Red Rising table. And people were taking them. And that book sold and sold and sold because they built that fan base by just giving away books, right?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
A ton of marketing spend went into that book in terms of getting that awareness out. And I think that's also the thing that Del Rey...
bravery there. That's not just like you can have a marketing spend that goes towards, again, like a Facebook buy. But I do think that there's some bravery there that people are still scared about. And, it's like if they say that there's
you
a
feel
galley...
like, oh, I'm giving up my sales, exactly. Right? Yeah.
And so what's 2,500? Like 2,500, by the way, is a good number of galleys. Like if they did that would be happy. So no one does 25,000. Okay. So if it's 2,500, I'd be like, oh my gosh, this is great. It's a good sign. Yeah. So if that was going on and they're concerned, any publisher concerned about losing 2,500 sales, then that book is in trouble. And that's basically every book. So it's just like, there's some bang your head against the walls kind of logic, but in the end, it's about the cost of building that stuff, right?
But you can't do that for every book, right? If you gave away 30,000 copies of every goddamn book that's published, like,
it has to be the right book.
Yeah, exactly. So figuring out when to do that is the real trick. And online advertising is undergoing a massive collapse right now. So where are we marketing books? How are we selling books? Print, what print journals? Like what newspapers are out there that we can put an ad in that's going to work, right? Like, so
it's such a waste of money. The money to put something into the New York Times in print is still, or the New Yorker, costs so much, and all these literary publishers still do it.
And I think they're just throwing money away. I don't understand it as a strategy.
It's almost like to just say to the author, a big author, hey, we got this, and so there's also like some of those kind of stupid buys too. Man, I got to be a better parent. I got to get this kid down. I know we have like 15 minutes left. Do you think that you can handle questions?
I'll do questions. So you guys keep dropping questions in the chat, and we'll go from there. So
before I leave, I just want to say, like, I apologize for this. This is clearly a little unprofessional, but this is like the reality of this world right now. And I think that we might have to, just as a bit of a warning, because of distance learning and stuff for the near future, we might have to change our time for this so that I can adjust and not do this, but that means our time might have to shift, and we'll have to figure out something like that. So I really appreciate your patience, and Dongwon especially. I'm sorry for throwing this at you.
No, all good.
We have to talk about outside publicists, though. You can't skip that. We have to say something about it, right?
Do you have anything to say about outside publicity real quick?
I'll say
30 seconds.
Are incredibly tricky because usually by the time you figure out you need one, it's too late to get one because you have to book them so early. They're so expensive too. Sometimes they get in the way. Sometimes when you hire them, they reduce the motivation of people in-house. So it's like really, really tricky. A lot of people swear by them. That's like $7,000 to $25,000. So ultimately, I hate having to use them, but if you have an author, the point is that if you get like a $75,000 up deal for your client, you should tell your client to put 5 to 10 of that away if they can, just for publicity and marketing, just for the potential of that.
Unless you love your publicist at the company that you're at, if you have a big deal, it's worth thinking about early. It is hard to feel that is worth it sometimes. It's hard to know that you're getting those results. It's hard to get somebody that you like that's good. It's a real challenge. It can be really useful. That said, I know some agencies that keep a publicist on staff, just literally have in-house marketing publicity staff. And, I think that's kind of genius. It's a very different model of agenting than what I'm doing. But I have a lot of respect for that approach of just sort of taking the lift from the publisher a little bit and saying, you know what, we know what we're doing. We know who our authors are. We know how to market their work. We're going to do that and hire and vet our own staff too. So,
all right. Well, let me sign off from here. This is say bye, Kat. You say bye. You say bye. Blow a kiss.
Bye.
All right. Bye, everybody. You've been cute this whole time. We just weren't trying.
Yeah.
Okay. Bye.
All right. So last thing I want to say is, publicity and marketing during this time of social distancing. We don't have access to bookstores. We don't have access to tours. A lot of our traditional techniques have been completely taken away from us right now. So it's been super interesting watching what publishers are doing. I've had, 4 or 5 books launched this summer, trying to figure out, and 2 of those were debuts, right? So trying to figure out how that's going, what we're doing there has been a real struggle. And I have to say, it has not been easy. So something to keep in mind is like, how are publishers innovating in this time? So I've been keeping an eye on different people's efforts, what people are doing. There's a lot of good online activity. I'm going to say Tor is probably doing the most interesting work in the area that I'm in. They're doing a great job of figuring out how to build new events across multiple authors, right? So basically making and hosting their own mini cons, their own mini series, right? Like they have the Tor After Dark stuff. They did TorCon one weekend. I don't know what the numbers on those things are, but it at least feels like they're really thinking through, okay, how do we bring people to this? How do we figure out what we're doing? San Diego Comic-Con, which is one of our biggest outlets for promoting new titles, was a complete bust this year in terms of numbers of people watching those events. And, I saw so little chatter for it. On Twitter and on other outlets. And, it's really tough this year, having lost most of our big channels for launching a book. So, I think trying to figure out how we're doing that. I mean, even sending out galleys, it's hard to do mailings right now. It's hard to do all these different things. So, I think organic reviews, blog posts. One thing that I push a lot of my writers to do is to develop their own newsletters. I think that is a thing that is really, really important, is having access to your own audience, right? So that's not dependent on the publisher's marketing. That's an email list that you own, that they're your fan base. So having that marketing channel, I think, is hugely important. Paid newsletters are a great revenue source. That's a little different from what I'm talking about in terms of having an announcement newsletter. Just get as many names as you can onto that thing. Email capture, I think, is still one of the main strategies that really works online. So, that kind of answered Matt's question a little bit before I saw it. Those are the publicity pushes that I think are working. Instagram takeovers, we're seeing a lot of those. We're seeing a lot of AMAs. I think they're okay. I don't know that readers are super engaging with them. I think the line from IG takeover to a buy button is pretty tenuous. So I think it can be a little hard for that to have a direct impact. I think it's a way for authors to feel engaged, though. It is some visibility. It is using the publisher's channel, so I like it on those fronts. I think it remains to be seen how impactful that's going to be. Okay. More questions, please put them in as they come up. Okay, so going back a little bit from Mark, are there things, specifically extra steps, you expect to do with your authors to move beyond those base marketing and publishing schema from the publisher? Newsletters are one, like I mentioned. Getting people signed up to their newsletter is really important. One thing that can be very helpful is getting essays placed, right? So getting an essay placed at a decent venue, at a place that has eyeballs. I think the old idea was to have a blog on your website, but what works better than getting people to come to you is you going to where people already are, right? Because that exposes you to new audiences. I think that gives an opportunity for more people to engage who may not have seen your name before, right? So, I think a thing that I try to really focus on is helping them build up their ability to place articles, to place essays, to do, Tor.com series, to be present on social media. All of these things, they don't have to do every single piece of it. No author is going to be good at every single thing. Some of them just aren't wired for this in general and just want to write their books, and that's all they want to do, right? So, I think those are all things that you need to keep in mind. Figure out what strategies make sense to you, and then figure out how to talk to individual clients and sort of tailor what works for their capability and their throughput, right? But it's constant. It's constant revision. It's constant finding new strategies. It's paying attention to what is working and what isn't working out there, and the awareness that even though most things aren't really working, it is still worth trying. You never know what's the thing that's going to make the difference. So you got to keep pushing, even though sometimes it can be very, very frustrating as a process. So, Natalie, we kind of answered your question a little bit. From Maria, sounds like a lot of big needle movers, book clubs are things publishers will get for a few titles in response to your shifting agents and authors. Yes, that is true. I wouldn't say that is shifting. I would say that has been the reality for quite some time now. The reality is that the author is the one primarily responsible for their book's reception in a lot of ways. And I think the earlier that we as agents can communicate that to authors is that I think publisher marketing publicity departments are best deployed as force multipliers, right? They can take the thing that you're already doing and magnify it in a way that can help get traction and help capitalize on areas that you're already succeeding, right? So if you have a big Twitter following, if you're really good at talking about a certain topic, if you're really, if they're really good at writing about certain ideas or being on YouTube or whatever it is, this is where we start talking about platform. Platform isn't as necessary in fiction as it is in nonfiction, but it does matter, and it matters in the sense that it starts to define what our strategies are going forward. I think I hear what you're saying about making you nervous. It's one of those things that I think the sooner you accept it as the reality of the situation and then figure out, okay, knowing that they're only pushing their lead titles this year, if we can't make it onto a lead title slot, what are we doing, right? What are our strategies? How do we build on this? And I think being super honest with yourself, being super honest with your client up front about what is going to happen here, I think is really, really important. So, okay. This is hard doing all the talking. Throat's getting sore. All right. What advice do you use to clients who never used social media before and are just starting once they get signed? The thing I think about there is only do what you enjoy doing, right? Don't force yourself to do something you hate. Try it, see if you hate it. But, I think Instagram is one of the most useful channels for actually reaching readers, right? Most of my clients aren't on Instagram. Most of them don't enjoy the process. They're not visual people. And, it's hard for them to be big on Instagram. So you know what? We don't push it. If you're good on Twitter, great. If you're good on Facebook, great. If you're good on Instagram, great. If you're bad at all of them, fine. We'll figure out something else, right? So my advice is to try it, to be yourself, to be honest. Don't tweet every single thought you have. Learn to filter. A brand is mostly editing back, right? It's not putting on an identity. It's reducing the amount of noise in what you post, so it's clearer who you are, right? So I talked about this a little bit in the branding episode way back when, almost 3 months ago now. We've been doing this for a minute. I think focusing on one or two elements I think is really important. So helping an author figure out what their brand is, helping them build a little bit of that identity, and then figure out, okay, how do they want to talk about it? And again, encouraging them, reminding them this isn't an obligation. If it's not working, don't chase it. That's how you're gonna, burn yourself out or get into trouble and say something that, you shouldn't be saying out there. Okay, from Woo Woo. What's the thing you ask the publisher to do the most in marketing? Mostly just pay attention, right? Mostly it's just, where's our marketing plan? What are you doing? Tell me what's up, I think it's less a specific ask oftentimes than just like, turn up the volume on your efforts. We don't feel like you're doing enough. The author's unhappy. I'm unhappy. Tell us what you're doing. It's less a specific do X, Y, Z, because that's their job a lot of the time. It's more, hey, we're getting traction here. We're getting traction here. Can you do something on this front? Hey, we're excited about this. Where's our banners for this? Where's the materials for that? So it tends to be very tactical. It tends to be really more of a push around the overall energy and effort going into it rather than any specific thing. So, okay. I think I'm going to call it there. Thank you guys for tuning in. Again, this is Agent Talk with Seth and Dongwan. Appreciate everyone hanging in through a little bit of a different format today while we're adjusting to all the challenges of the world that we live in now. Like Seth mentioned, he and I are talking about some options about how to change up the format or the timing to make sure that we're not going to be super impacted by returning to distance learning, and Seth sort of managing. I also have some stuff going on in my life that might require some changes. So we're going to figure that out, and we'll keep everyone posted on our plans. We love doing this. Our full intent is to keep doing it, and I hope you guys are also enjoying it. So anyways, we hope that you guys have found this to be a useful conversation. You can find Seth on Twitter at Seth A.S. Fishman. I'm also on Twitter at Dongwan, and I have a newsletter called Publishing is Hard. You can find it at publishingishard.substack.com. Thank you guys again for coming through and for all your excellent questions. Until we'll see you next Friday again at 1 p.m. EST and 10 a.m. PST. Until then, be good, read more, and publish better. Bye, y'all.